right, let me make sure the LinkedIn is working.
Yeah, let's see. Let's see how we're looking.
I don't see the LinkedIn streaming just yet. There we go, coming up.
We're live. If I remember, it's on a delay as well.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, thank you everyone for bearing with us as we figure out some of the technical setup pieces there. We got folks streaming in or tuning in to our stream here on Crowdcast. We got folks tuning in via LinkedIn Live. So to everyone that's joining, appreciate you taking the time to chat. We're super excited to kick off the first inaugural conversation in a series of discussions with other AI sales founders in the AI sales go-to-market space, and focusing on the right way for sales teams to use AI. My name is Dustin Beaudoin, founder of ChatAE. I got with me a good friend, Trevor Lee, founder of Myko. We're super excited about the discussion today. We're going to get into all kinds of topics related to how we're seeing sales teams leverage AI, what best practices or tips we can share for folks out there. What are the areas we're seeing folks, improperly attempting to use AI? That should be a spicy, fun conversation. And then we'll even get into a little bit of our learnings from building AI sales tools, as well as some predictions for 2025 and what we expect going forward. So a lot of fun topics. We'll also do dedicated Q&A, but as we're going through the discussion, if anyone has questions, of course, feel free to drop them in the chat, whether that's on the Crowdcast stream or whether that's in the LinkedIn Live comments, and we'll make sure to be monitoring those and get to those as we go throughout. So with that, we can kick things off. Again, like I mentioned, everybody, I'm Dustin Beaudoin, founder of ChatAE. For those who don't know, ChatAE is a sales copilot helping sales teams with pre and post call workflows. So particularly focused on helping folks prep and research for their upcoming calls more effectively, as well as handle follow-ups and more strategic next steps planning. And so with me, I got Trevor Lee, founder of Myko. Trevor, I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll get into the discussion.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Dustin. My name's Trevor, co-founder, CEO here at Myko. We're building a language interface for people to get data into their CRMs like Salesforce. So right from your Slack or Microsoft Teams app on your phone, on the go, leave a voice note that updates a new contact, gets an account added in there, updates existing opportunities, creates cases. Anything you need to do in Salesforce, we're giving you the power to do it directly from your phones while you're on the go. So I think that's the short and sweet of it. Certainly a lot going on in AI right now. So it's gonna be fun kind of talking through all the different things we're seeing in the market.
Yeah, actually, let's start there. So for anyone out there who's familiar with me and ChatAE, and Trevor, you've heard this story that I've shared before. When I was looking at problem areas to tackle with ChatAE, one of the things that inspired me to focus on pre and post call routine administrative workflows was that I felt that there were a lot of startups and a lot of noise focused on workflows with AI in sales that I felt were maybe not the right way to use AI. A lot of AI BDR solutions, a lot of use cases for leveraging AI for automating outbound or trying to replace the BDR or even replace sales coaching, things like that. I think there's a lot of different exciting areas that there's a lot of energy behind with AI and sales for a lot of obvious reasons. But what are some of the things you're seeing, Trevor, when you look at the market or talk to customers or talk to prospects around what are the areas that you're seeing the most amount of excitement with leveraging AI, and what are the areas you're seeing those folks have the most amount of success with leveraging AI in sales?
So I guess we're not going to start on the AI SDR topic then.
We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get into the wrong and the negative soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think an interesting thing that you're seeing is AI has been a really good addition for sales teams, really help the enablement use case. How do you make sellers better? How do you get them the ability to kind of practice what they're doing, how do you, like, these language models like OpenAI are very good at these conversational tasks. And so similar to how our product like gets data into a system, like especially with these recent like whisper models and some of the other more interactive voice modules, we're seeing a lot of bullishness really around this kind of like training and practice use case. So for all of these, whether it's like the AI dialers or the other places, having 15 practice conversations with an AI before you get your first conversation with an actual customer, I think is awesome, especially for first time sellers who have never done it before. Like, yeah, it's not 100% the same experience, but like now you're not burning your company's actual leads to go from 0 to call it 75% rather than like starting now at 75% on that first call. And so I think there's a lot of use cases we're seeing there where the precision around what you're doing matters a little bit less, and AI can provide a lot of value without you needing to rely on, you know, that 100% accuracy or the ability for it to do every single thing perfect.
Yeah, I like that. Like that. That's AI acting as a true sort of assistant or co-pilot in a way, rather than trying to replace a function, right? Like, I don't think anyone. Well, we'll get into this in a little bit later, but yeah, talking about leveraging AI to sort of augment what we're already doing in sales. Yeah, that's a big part of like why we focus where we focus with ChatAE, making sellers better with how they approach their calls, the research and prep they do, and also making sure that like teams have a consistent way of doing some of these things. I think I'm sure you're seeing this. Would love to hear more about this from you on the data side of things in terms of getting data accurately into the CRM and the way that you all are helping with that. There's like a consistency aspect to things that when we're talking to teams and talking to sales leaders, there's clearly an opportunity for AI to help teams be more consistent with certain processes. For us, that is definitely on like the call prep, research, follow up, and next steps aspects of things, like all those pre and post call workflows. Um, and I think like that consistency in terms of enforcing and ensuring best practices are followed, like there is an opportunity for AI to help with that, where you're not asking AI to literally replace a human's job, but instead you're asking AI to help your team be more consistent in following certain best practices, and especially like the administrative tasks that every sales team has to do. I think that's why one aspect of that's the big aspect of why what you all are doing with Myko resonated with me so much, is like, what's more administrative than getting data into your CRM, right? It's kind of similar to how we think about things at ChatAE. Like, what's more administrative than writing that follow-up email after a call? What's more administrative than like researching into your upcoming account and prospect you're about to meet with and really doing it richly, right? So I love the focus of leveraging AI for those administrative tasks. Talk to me about like how you're seeing folks resonate with that scope, right? Like because there is a lot of noise out there and a lot of like honestly energy and interest around using AI to either flat out replace certain humans or materially cut back like the amount of like effort and work that one person is doing, so that maybe you have like a BDR who used to send out a certain amount of emails, make a certain amount of calls, and with different AI solutions they're able to double, triple, quadruple their workflow, or you have an AI agent doing some things while the person is doing another thing, and you've just multiplied your workforce. Like, I am curious how customers are taking like that. I don't know, like maybe you'll disagree with me, like less sexy use of AI for like solving these administrative routine workflows when there is all this energy around like these really sexy use cases for like replacing headcount.
So I think there's two levels to it. I think at the senior level, it's really obvious that AI is going to have an impact on kind of like workforce numbers, the total number of people you have working in different departments, different things, as you can get better productivity. But I think it's too early to think about that of AI replacing really people for anything. And I think a lot of the issues that some of the AI companies are going to run into is the ones that are marketing themselves as replacements rather than like augmentation tools. And so a lot of the enterprises we talk to are really going down the task of like, look, like we have 1,500 sellers across our organization doing these things. if we can save 1,500 people a couple hours a week on certain tasks, or if we can help all 1,500 people get a 1% better uplift on response rates or anything, like that's a really meaningful driver of the bottom line of the business. And so because you're at scale, looking at those little ways that you can drive efficiencies with AI to help people be better at the things they're already doing, I think is what gets really attractive and why people are leaning into AI. And I think there is a lot of hype on some of the more sexy use cases. And I think a lot of the hesitation is, are we as an organization ready for AI? And what does that mean? And what are the types of AI and AI things that we can implement or start doing that don't require a more massive transformation uplift? And
Yeah.
so what we're doing, I think, falls in a pretty similar bucket to what you're doing of like, you don't need perfect CRM data to use Myko, and you don't need perfect CRM data to use ChatAE. You don't need all of your systems to be perfectly scoped. You don't need everything mapped out. You can get started with using AI, even simple, like using just OpenAI or Perplexity, whatever you want. You can get started as some of these simple things to kind of get your feet in the water in lower lift ways, so that those longer term, like bigger picture transformational type of things that you want to see done, once you're ready to get there, you can embark on it, but you don't have to start there. And I think that's an important point of the conversation that we have with a lot of early customers of like, there are ways that you can kind of dip your feet into the water on this
Yeah.
without remaking your entire kind of like organizational business model.
You raise a good point there. That is a question I have gotten from sales leaders, particularly sales leaders who are balancing the different priorities of where to apply AI across their team. Like one of the things that's excited us at ChatAE is we can so easily plug in to in a low lift way into these pre and post call workflows that sales teams are doing, so that there's not a lot of uplift to use ChatAE to research for an upcoming call, for instance, right? Or even on the post call stuff. And I think that that's what's exciting. It is a little different, I think, in terms of like our approach. Like we are very much taking a approach where individual sellers sometimes just find ChatAE and sign up, whereas there's other AI tools. I think Myko would fall more into this category where it's like, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but like where it's like there's a lot more value once a team is on it, and you have like broad distribution across a company. I think that's true for us too, but I think we've seen a lot of individual sellers get excited about using ChatAE on a personal basis as well as like leaders. But when I'm talking to leaders about adopting AI and prioritizing where to use it, one of the things that comes up with them is, hey, like there's all these different things we could use AI for. Like, how do we think about prioritizing where to go first? I'm biased when I tell them, like, hey, go start with those routine administrative tasks, like the things that AI is going to be good at, and where the things that even if as AI gets better, like it's not cannibalizing itself or it's not cannibalizing anything your team is doing. It's just sort of a net positive. How do you think about that conversation with sales leaders? Like when you have the conversation with them around prioritizing where to invest energy from applying AI to certain workflows, like how do you walk them through that?
I think a big thing for us is one, we are a little bit more different than you in that we need to connect into the Salesforce.
Yeah.
And to do that requires typically some actual like sales cycle or process. And so
Yeah.
we're usually having those conversations with leaders and transformation teams talking about what that looks like. And I think as we kind of walk them through what this journey looks like, usually they have a pretty strong roadmap already of like an understanding of like, I want AI to do X, Y, Z, and all these different things. And what we try and do is we kind of help scope with them of like, okay, some of those things on your list, like AI is not ready for. Like you're gonna wait for GPT-5 or 6 for you to really like nail those, or you're
Yeah.
gonna need another couple of years for your data to get in a place where you're able to handle those types of things. And so the other like trade-off for them becomes how much time, effort, and implementation work is required, and what is that balancing act for the benefit that'll happen in the organization. And so a lot of the conversations that we have on our side are, how can we help scope this for you in a way that minimizes the amount of work your team is working on, because oftentimes teams will have their own AI initiatives working on different projects. They'll have their own pet, like maybe they're working on building their own AI SDRs for their own internal use cases, right? And
Right.
so, how do we kind of balance out where we think we can fit in? What are some things that we think are good use cases where AI can handle it reliably without a lot of implementation, and then meet at that center point of like, okay, look, like it's not that much, like look at the things that aren't that much work to get started, because if you get those initial successes using AI for your team, it makes the rest of that roadmap much cleaner, rather than if you start with something and you turn off of it and you don't use it, like the entire organizational AI roadmap after that is going to be impacted pretty severely, because people are going to have that mistrust and be like, oh, you're giving me another tool that doesn't work. Like, why would I try this one?
I think the trust is such a big thing. I mean, the amount of conversations I've had with even individual reps who have no experience using AI, the amount of times like they've said to me like, "Hey, if I'm going to use ChatAE, I need to know that like the research you're delivering me is accurate, and I need to know like where you got it from. I need to know when you tell me some recent news event associated with my prospect or with this company that like that actually took place."
Yeah.
um, and if it's a case for us where like a rep is leaving ChatAE to go double check something on Google News, like it kind of starts to eliminate some of the benefits, right? So the trust piece is huge, and I think trust is, you see it in varying degrees, right? Like it's one thing to trust that your data is making it into the CRM accurately. Like you can verify that pretty easily. With us, like it's actually I think relatively easy to gain trust once you've gone through using the research a few times and like cross checking it, and we've built in like citations and things like that to help enable that trust. I think it's another thing entirely to say like you trust an AI agent to do all of your outreach for you, or even do a big chunk of it, right? Like, we do use AI to write some emails for our users, but they're on the follow up side of things. They're on like the side of things where like you have transcript, you have notes, like you have rich information and context to work off of, where you're not sort of being that inventive with what you're actually writing. So like even like an email writing AI assistant, you're talking about greater degrees of trust. And this kind of wades a little bit into like that AI BDR discussion that you see a lot of folks having, is where it's like there's a trust element to it in terms of using AI for doing your prospecting, doing your outbounding, and literally reaching out on your behalf. There's also and with that trust element, there's like a brand consideration piece to it, where just like when you hire somebody, that person becomes an extension of your company, extension of your brand. Now we have agents that are becoming extensions of companies and brands. And then there's also like the results element to it, right? Like both short, medium, and long term. Like maybe you get a short term pop because just your throughput is way bigger or way greater than when you had your BDRs writing emails or even using like an outreach sequencer. But once you have an AI BDR coming in and layering on even greater volume, like maybe you do see a short term bump. Medium long term, how does that hold up when all the incentives become to just drive more throughput? And how do you maintain quality over larger and larger throughput? And how do you maintain results when buyers are getting inundated with AI BDRs on LinkedIn, email, phone, even? So I think there's always been this challenge of like how you stand out. And then AI, I think, presents some opportunities to maybe stand out, but also I think medium and long term provide some potential concerns
Well,
with those
how
type
do you
of
think
use
about
cases.
the like human in the loop element, like for your product? I know it's something we've thought a lot about of
Yeah,
we're verifying or having users manually verify anything our product does before we actually do anything. And
yeah,
so that helps us kind of like build the trust and have them know that like if anything gets messed up in their Salesforce, like they will have seen it and approved it. And
yep,
I think like how I'm just curious, like how are you thinking about on your side of like that initial verification layer?
yeah. I think for us, I don't want to say never because we'll see like how things evolve, how good AI gets, and how comfortable customers get. But I mean, there's a reason why the things that require the highest level of trust, like email writing, we are sort of only doing it in a way right now where it's high context situations, and also where the human has to actually trigger the initial flow, right? I think like certainly we're not sending emails on behalf of users, or automating any sort of outreach in that way. I think the other aspect of things is like a lot of our approach so far has been to take a very intentional human in the loop approach. I think there's going to be a balance we're going to strike between having a human in the loop to trigger each of these flows and doing things a little more automatically, right? So like I think it's okay if we are syncing up to somebody's calendar, reading their upcoming calls, and automatically providing and pushing that research to them. I think that's that's one thing. I think it's another thing where we were to say, hey, after your calls happen, we've already sent that email follow up to the customer and trust us that it was correct, right? So we've sort of designed from the ground up, given the flows that we're focused on, to be pretty human in the loop. But I think you raise a good point, because there's always going to be this tension between like provide more automation and keep the trust with the human in the loop. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a really good point.
we definitely think a lot about how humans are still in general like getting used to and comfortable with AI and interacting with AI, and what does that paradigm look like. And so making it as much of like hey, this is here to help you, not replace you type of thing, I think is something that's been working in our favor so far.
Yeah, 100%. um I am, so that actually leads me to something I wanted to ask you about. Like as you think about, we sort of touched on this a little bit, in terms of like customer feedback and what you're hearing from folks in terms of not only Myko but uses of AI more generally. As you've been through this now for a little bit, and you've gotten the chance to get a ton of customer feedback, I am curious, like what customer feedback or insight has most surprised you from what you've from what you've heard? Either like totally, like for instance, for me, one of the things that's surprised me is like, we had a hypothesis around how people could use AI for these pre and post call workflows. Candidly, I've just been surprised by like how many sales reps are still out there that like haven't even used ChatGPT. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there. But I'm curious, like what feedback or like insight from customers that you've heard has like most surprised you so far?
I think one simple piece is just like how hard Salesforce is to use, and how even like the smallest tasks are a hassle. And I don't think even we fully appreciate the scale and size of the problem that we were solving until we really got in front of a lot of field sales and field sellers. And they walked us through like, look, I can't even add a new contact on my mobile app. Like I can't even do the simplest things without having to go to my computer at the end of the day. And I think those are things you can only learn through just like deep, repeated customer discovery. I think maybe on the flip side of it, an interesting thing is we originally started our product on the analytics side, so pulling data from Salesforce. And probably what surprised us is we kind of pivoted away from that because the buying motion actually didn't match what we thought it would be from our customer discovery calls. So almost on the flip side of like the product was there, right? We would have calls with sales leaders and they'd be like, I want this product. And, we go through your customer discovery checklist and be like, what's the pain point on a scale of 1 to 10? Like, how much do you want to solve this? All those things.
Right.
I think we didn't fully factor in and appreciate the scale at which the decision isn't ultimately always theirs, and the way that other people in an organization can impact how AI is used and implemented. And
Mm.
so I think that's also an interesting insight of like we spent the first half of this year really getting rejected from a lot of deals for that reason. And it's something that like, it's hard to learn until the rubber meets the road. You're asking people for money.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, one thing on our side is like when we launched ChatAE, we very intentionally didn't build it into any systems, right? Like we intentionally didn't set up a Salesforce integration. We intentionally didn't set up like a Zoom integration or build like a meeting bot or whatever. And I think we kind of knew that like we would have to build some of those things eventually. Like eventually like sales leaders would ask us to be more natively integrated into some aspect of their stack. What's interesting is like the amount of conversations I've had with sales leaders where um, they're a little bit more agnostic about like where you build into than I realized. I think for you all, like you were always going to build into the CRM. It's obvious. For us, like I've had many conversations where folks are like, look, like I don't care if it's, you know, our email you're building into like our inbox. I don't care if you're building in the Slack. I don't care if you're building into our calendar. I don't care if you're building into our CRM. I don't care. We've even heard people say like, I don't care if you build in the Gong directly. Just build in somewhere so that it's a little more native for when we are rolling this out to hundreds and hundreds of sales reps, which wasn't a surprise to us in the sense of like building into like native stacks, but the agnosticism around like where that lives and exists is interesting. And I think kind of exciting because we're it doesn't necessarily dictate that you know everyone's going to have to build into Salesforce or everyone's going to have to immediately like build a meeting bot, right? Like it does indicate to me that the aperture is expanding a little bit for what customers view as like core systems. Like I don't think 7 years ago, 6 years ago, we definitely wouldn't have heard people defining Gong as like a core part of their stack that they're okay with people building into, right? Like at that point, it was still very much like a point solution. So I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities for like building your AI product into like existing systems where it's not always like gotta be the CRM or gotta be Zoom or gotta be, you know, the inbox. I think there's some interesting opportunities there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up a really good point of we're very bullish on not just our, obviously our idea, but other applications in general, things that are tackling the kind of embedded notion of plugging in where teams are already working rather than trying to own the interface initially. I think people have so many logins, you have so many SaaS apps that there's a lot of fatigue out there. And so the extent that we, and I've seen other companies have success building into apps or platforms or interfaces where sellers are already spending a lot of time, it seems to be a much more natural fit and a lot easier to ingest because you don't have to worry about kind of selling to everyone that they need another set of logins somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I think for us, it's been an interesting balance. Like we wanted to launch in a way where people could use it the easiest way possible. So because of that, we built ChatAE standalone and without any integration work required. Um, the next step for us is actually like building into more of those native flows. So like integrating someone's calendar, reading for their upcoming calls, automatically pushing the research to them either via email or Slack or both. And then that's where I think the ability for like a sales leader to get more comfortable with distributing like not only our tool but any tool across a wide range of sellers in their sales organization becomes a little bit easier. That brings us back to the trust thing. It's like not a trust in the output of what AI is providing you as much as like a trust that it'll get adopted too. Because on the one hand, AI is different in the sense that it's like generating outputs for you, it's generating data for you, it's doing research for you. Like you have to trust that the things it's doing are being done correctly. But on the other side, it's just like any other software where it's like you need to trust that it's going to be adopted.
Yeah.
And so I think there's like a challenge there too. Like you can have an AI agent going fully autonomously, doing a bunch of outreach for you and emailing for you and outbound for you. And like technically that counts as adoption. But it's another thing when you're asking like humans to use it to augment their flows.
Yeah, I think what we see a lot is there is a lot of concern from sales leaders and people about if we buy this and implement it, will people use it? And how do we know they're going to use it? How do we make it as easy as possible for them to use? So I think people have been burned by a lot of AI applications already in the like 2 years since we've had this Cambrian explosion.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of really deep thinking around, is this something that does fit into our existing workflows? Is this easy enough for us where we know people will actually use it? And that kind of gets back down to like, we're doing more top down, whereas you're doing a little bit more bottoms up. So you might not run into this as much if you can already show that you have sellers using it at the companies.
Right.
But it's something that's definitely one of the biggest drivers of sales conversations around what does usage typically look like? What should we expect usage to be? How do we know? How do we gauge? What are some good benchmarks we would want to see in the first couple of weeks?
Yep. Yeah. All right, let's get into the fun stuff. Let's talk about what we see coming up for 2025. Well, actually, sorry, before we get there, and this might relate to some of the predictions. We hinted at this a little bit, but like flat out, what would you say if a sales leader was asking you for advice on prioritizing like where they use AI for their team? What is something you would flat out tell them? Like, don't do this. Like, this is flat out a wrong way to use AI. Like, and then maybe that leads into like predictions in terms of like where we see things going. But yeah, I'm curious, like, what would you say is like the wrong way for a sales team to use AI?
I think broadly speaking, trying to automate any task end to end. So it doesn't have to be like the AI SDR use case necessarily, but anything that you're being sold to that can do a series of tasks, whether it's like an agentic workflow end to end without humans being involved, I would caution people away from at this point. I don't think it's there yet. I think what we will start to see more of this year is I think we'll start to see more successful sales tech companies implementing AI in their solutions in creative ways that can layer in automations broadly. So whether it's like the call recording tools, like the Momentums and the Wins, being able to get the data from the call and then draft the email and then like help you through next steps. Like I think we're going to start seeing more of that layering of actions off of a lot of what early stage startups and even later stage companies have rolled out as like initial AI use cases. I think we'll start to see it eat into more of the workflows. I think the question to be mindful of is just that like nobody or no thing in the market right now is good enough to eat all of the workflow.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where you get oversold a bill of goods that I think winds up kind of disappointing ultimately.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the idea of like automating an end-to-end workflow kind of fits into the idea of like if you think you're purchasing a tool at this point to replace your BDR, like I think you're solely mistaken. Like flat out. There's a part of me that wants to go as far as to say like you should not use AI to write your outbound emails, but I won't go quite that far. But I do think like, and maybe I'm showing like my relative age in the SaaS space, but like I've just seen this movie before where it's like, I lived through like outreach and sales loft 1.0. It's natural. Sales folks are always looking for easier ways to do outreach, to do outbound, to do pipe gen. I think there's a lot of medium longer term harm that can be done with leveraging AI to, like you said, try to take the outbound workflow and automate it end to end.
I
So
think there's probably some people that are like these GTM engineers that we've seen people talk about on LinkedIn that are good enough and work for companies with compelling enough offers, especially in like the SMB space, where like it probably crushes. Like you can get really good response rates, you can get closed deals. Like I do think there are situations where it works and it works really well. It works better than humans. And like that's not to say there aren't. I think the big hesitation is like you got to be an expert. Like that's the A team of people in the best case scenario set up in a scenario that's built for something like that to work, where your company is such a compelling offer that if you get in front of this type of person, you're going to win the deal because they have the problem. You have such a good, like those do exist. Like there are companies that have that are slam dunks, and AI SDRs I think make a ton of sense for those, especially in the like SMB space. The question is just like the number of companies implementing it and doing it is far greater than those companies that fit in that bucket of like very strong, compelling value offers with absolute experts implementing it. So you run into all of these situations of companies that just send super generic garbage emails to a ton of people in their TAM that just make people unhappy.
Yeah, this fits. This leads into a little bit of my prediction, but only thing I might quibble with there is like even for that like bullseye like rare use case where it's like super compelling offer, you're selling the huge TAM, you have a GTM engineer like expert setting things up. I think like my bold prediction, I don't know if it's bold or not because we've already seen this start to play out with like previous waves of backlash to automation and automating outreach. A 2025 prediction I have is I think 2025 is going to be the year of the AI BDR backlash, and I think you're going to see an anti AI solution for buyers come to the market. Meaning, I think you're going to see an AI blocker come to the market that gets some widespread adoption by buyers that automatically detects whether it's an email, a LinkedIn message, a call, whatever the case, whatever the channel is, automatically detects that the message was written by AI and delivered by an AI BDR and just not just like marks it as spam, but flat out like outright blocks communications from that domain altogether and from anyone associated with that company. I really think we're going to see like a broadly adopted anti-AI buyer centric tool arise, and I think it'll be interesting like what happens then because any sort of short term gain you got from automating outreach starts to run up against like are you going to get through to people or not? And I think that's an extension of like the problem that exists now, but there hasn't really been a lot of like AI applied on the buyer side yet, and so I'm interested to see how that goes.
Yeah, I don't think we'll get as far as your suggestion just because I don't think it's technically feasible with high enough degree of accuracy to spot AI, especially as the AI is getting better at this point. Like the false flag rate is so high. But I do think the premise of it, like what Andy Mowat tried to build with Gated, of like you can use AI to start scraping people that are pitching you. And like if the AI knows your problems and your setup and solutions, like you can have an AI filter all of those inbound that aren't from like domains that
Yeah.
you know. And then it can be like, oh, this is actually a compelling pitch. Like this is one you should look at, and then you can filter out everything else. I think that starts looking a lot more realistic, and I think we'll see something like that coming sooner rather than later.
Yeah, what's interesting for me is like LinkedIn because like we've already seen these like LinkedIn AI BDR bots, and it's like up until recently LinkedIn has been this sort of like safe space for outreach where it's like been kind of hard to automate outreach. And LinkedIn has like reacted poorly to tools that have like leveraged, their API or tried to do like automation. But we're definitely seeing more like automation and straight up like AI BDRs, AI SDRs on LinkedIn itself, whether it's with the AI generated comments, whether it's with AI generated outreach. And so I think like these other channels besides email and calling are going to be really interesting to monitor and see like what if any backlash will exist there to like AI driven outreach in channels where like typically the user's expectation like with LinkedIn was that you weren't going to log in to LinkedIn and get like inundated with thousands of AI pitches. So I think that'll
I
be
do think
interesting.
in person will continue to be like rising in popularity over 2025, just because all of these channels are getting so crowded to the extent that you can connect with people in real life and form real relationships. Yeah, I think that's going to drive a lot of value for companies, and people that lean into that, I think, are going to be more successful than not.
Yeah, 100%. Um, awesome. Well, we're getting up to time here, Trevor. I want to first like thank you for joining us, and then I guess parting question. We did some predictions there, and we sort of touched on this, but as we round into the new year here, maybe this is sort of a extension of what we were talking about, but I am curious, like what you're most excited for to see play out in 2025, whether that's personally with Myko, whether that's a trend you're seeing play out, and maybe we can wrap on some positivity there.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing I'm looking for in the market and excited about is kind of measuring and understanding what legacy platforms are doing versus startups. and where those opportunity gaps continue to lie. I think everybody is implementing AI in the same time, and lots of people are implementing it in similar ways. And so, how companies like both of ours are able to kind of creatively come up with solutions that the legacy players can't, that are unique and kind of go against what they've built in a way that gives us some defensibility is a strong word, but some initial runway to get into the market and get a wedge, I think is a pretty interesting space as we kind of continue staying on the lookout for not just Salesforce, but like, oh, what did Gong release this week? What did ZoomInfo release this week? How are people using Outreach as a new tool? I think tracking that is going to be one, really interesting, and then two, going to drive a lot of where this market ends up going. Because I do think there are scenarios where these big players that have so much reach, like, yeah, GPT-5 comes out, like they could just slap some things on and they could do a lot of what most of these startups are doing right now. And so being able to track that and see how startups are able to continue nimbly evolving is where kind of I'm super excited. I think we've got a good pitch. I think you've got a good pitch for as well. But it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I think to wrap here, like one kind of an extension of what you were saying, an area I'm excited and optimistic for relating to that going into 2025 is like, what are the areas that continue to be neglected by the bigger startups, right? Like, or by bigger companies and large startups? Like, what are the areas that continue to be neglected by Salesforce, Gong, Apollo, ZoomInfo, HubSpot, whoever it is? I think that's always interesting because for us as startups, like we go to where the market's being underserved or where it's being neglected, and so I think that's something that'll be continuing to be interesting to monitor as well.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Also, everyone who tuned in, yeah, really appreciate it. This is the first of many exciting discussions with founders and practitioners in the space. So, Trevor, thank you for joining. Really enjoyed the conversation. You want to give any sort of last minute shout out or pitch for Myko? Feel free. But yeah, really appreciate you taking the time.
No, this has been great. I mean, if anyone watching is an outside sales team and wants to help them get data back in their Salesforce, you can find us at Myko.ai. Otherwise, enjoy this as well. It was great chatting with you.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, Trevor. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you next time.